Hey everyone, it's Daniel here again with our latest episode of Founders Live, and I have my friend Mallorie joining us from Bridgit. Mallorie, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks so much for having me on the show. Really excited to chat today.
I'm super excited. We're calling in from our respective bedrooms, not too far away, only a couple of hours drive between Toronto and Kitchener-Waterloo. I'm just super excited. How are you doing? How is life?
Things are good. It's amazing how, even though no one's been working in person over the last year, how you actually get to know people in more personal ways than you ever have before when everyone's operating out of their bedrooms and out of their houses. So it's been a unique year to say the least, but a very busy one at Bridgit.
A very Bridgit one. Well, I'm super excited to dive into all of this, and these conversations I think have been a great byproduct of the pandemic and COVID. Of just it's easier to have a lot of these conversations with people around the world. So yesterday we had someone. I was doing this at 6 a.m. with someone in the Netherlands. I don't know. We'll eventually build one for Australia and everywhere else. In all the conversations I've been having with founders, I found it really the most interesting to start at the very beginning and just understanding kind of early life and how it got to kind of what you're doing today. And I know you had a business that you were running called Start Gallery, but even before that, when you were a kid, was like startups a thing? Was that like, did you have a side hustle? Did you sell newspapers? Did you flip candy? Like what was Mallorie like when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I certainly never associated myself with being an entrepreneur. Like that wasn't a word that I used or that I really expected could necessarily be a career path or anything like that. But then looking back, thinking at some of the things that I spent my spare time with or some of the things I did as a kid. So, I was always putting babysitter advertisements into my neighbors' mailboxes around the neighborhood. I would pick flowers out of my neighbor's garden and then give them to her as a bouquet because I knew I'd get treats. She'd always give me like chocolate or brownies if I did that. One year for the holidays, I asked for, those calculators you can get at, Staples or whatever Business Depot store, and they print out receipts.
Yeah.
And I would bill my family for various things I would do around the house. So like there's certainly these behaviors that maybe line up with what my role is today, but I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. And we can get more into the details, but the first time I really associated myself with potentially that as being a viable career path was when I was applying to university, Western University, just a couple hours outside of Toronto, and got an entrepreneurship certificate. So, we looked at your application based on the types of things you've been involved in. We think you'd be a great fit for the entrepreneurship certificate. So if you go to Ivy and you go into that program, we'll give you, the scholarship. And I was like, okay, free money to go do some of these courses. Sure. No problem. That was the first time I actually, associated the word entrepreneurship or entrepreneur with some of the things I'd been working on all along.
Do you remember thinking back, what do you think you'd put in that original Ivy application that made them think that?
I think, involvement in student council, starting a lot of different clubs within my high school, just always starting things up. I think involvement in, a lot of sports, always having a job. Like as soon as I was old enough to get hired somewhere, I was working part-time. So just like a very jam-packed, ambitious schedule, I would say, but probably more like the student council and then starting new clubs at my school were probably the two biggest things I imagine that they noticed on that initial application.
Was there a club you're really proud of when you started in high school? You're also on TV too, which I thought was a cool side point to explore.
So I think one of the ones that I'm actually now just thinking of is we had a student clothing program, but all of the clothes, so like the merch, the school merch was pretty out of date and it wasn't really relevant to a lot of the students. The colors were out of style. The logo was, not, they didn't have anything funny on them. So I basically like rebranded the whole merch store. And we like really scaled our sales and created like different, almost like, so we had the IB program, for instance, and there was merch specific to the IB program. So I sort of segmented the different, target market for the different merch items. And that was also probably one that was decently successful that they would have noticed.
That's pretty cool. I mean, you basically started an early. I don't know if Shopify was around at the time, but you're like an early pioneer of the e-com merch drops that all the influencers now want to drop their own merch stores and things like that. You're early to the game.
My favorite one was we were called the Colonel by Cougars, and this one. There was a lot of debate among the faculty whether this got approved or not, but it was a shirt that said "I heart Cougars," and so like all the students bought it. And anyways, that one really, yeah.
That's amazing. I feel like you could sell that today. Like you could this school could have an international brand of just like all the people who love it. Whether or not they want to be associated with that is secondary, but all the donation advancement goals would just like hit like that.
Exactly. So that one definitely hit the mark.
and since we're on a version of a TV program, how did that come about with what you were doing on like the Sports Zone or the Rogers Sports Zone? Because that's pretty cool. And because it's another thread. So I'm noticing patterns in all my conversations. And there was a period of like 3 people back to back, one who's the CEO of Barry's, a woman who started Andy Swim, and a third person who started Jennifer Yen, who started a beauty brand. They're all in like TV, television. And that was like their big thing before becoming an entrepreneur. And I know that's not ultimately the start of your career, but you had a taste of that, at least when you were younger.
Yeah, so it's interesting because now I am all about, essentialism and saying no to things and being very focused. But I think when you're growing up and in high school in particular, it was actually an amazing approach for me to basically say yes to everything. And I was just involved in so many different sports teams and activities and all of that. And so one day my dad saw a newspaper article saying that they were going to be interviewing hosts for this new Rogers High School Sports Zone TV show where you'd interview athletes on a weekly basis. And he was like, Mallorie, you have a lot of time on your hands with, student council and work and this and that. And I figured maybe this would be of interest to you too. And I was like, sure, let's do it. So I went to the interview process and got picked, and it got me out of calc class every Friday afternoon. I'd have to take the bus to the TV station, and it was all volunteer based, but really just awesome experience getting to know, different people in the community, being a little bit more comfortable probably on camera than I would have been otherwise. And it was just a really fun thing to do in high school. So I said yes to everything. So it got me lots of exposure. So, a great generalist, but certainly not an expert at too many things.
I feel like I'm the same way as you. I still think that's room for improvement for me is to be a bit more focused in my decisions, but it unlocks fun opportunities. So, so you end up going to Ivy in this entrepreneurship program. And I'm sure there's more things we could talk through. The one that stood out to me was Start Gallery, which at least from what I can read online, believe what you want when you read online. It seems like your first business that you had started before. Was there anything else you had tried to start before that? I
made bracelets and tried to sell those on campus, not so successfully. Start Gallery was also not a success. So can talk through that, but it had an interesting ending to the company. But the major disappointment with Start Gallery was that I was probably one of the earliest customers on Shopify. So I was using Shopify to power the e-commerce platform of selling the student art on their platform. And at the time, I think they were 20 employees in Ottawa, working out of, this sort of crappy building downtown. And I'd call their support team and get help setting up my store. And I'm like, instead of spending the money on getting the store off the ground and, all of that, imagine I had just quit school and gone to work at Shopify. It probably would have been a way better use of my time. But
how about you build this for everyone else? And you're probably talking to Toby on the phone without even realizing it.
Literally, like, who knows? It's possible. So anyways, the beginning of Start Gallery was really, we had to do a business feasibility project as part of the program I was in. And the group that I was working with had this whole other idea they wanted to pursue, which was fine. We did that for the project. But as part of the ideation process, I had explored this idea of having an online student art gallery. And the initial inspiration was because I was in comparative literature for the first 2 years before I went to Ivy, the business school. And I was in a lot of classes with fine art students during that and all the art history courses. And they were telling me that they had all this art that they would bring home to their parents and it would just sit in their basement or they'd throw it out. And when they graduated, they had no experience selling art. So it was very difficult to get accepted into a professional gallery. And I was like, oh, maybe there's an opportunity for sort of this in-between phase where, it helps these young artists get their initial sales, gets them some experience in that process. And then other people can buy art for, maybe a decent price. The major disconnect was when art students are in school, their professors are like, your art could be worth millions, like never undersell yourself, don't cut yourself short. And so there was always some debate what the price point of that art should have been. And, lots of students had the art, but I was never really able to crack the other side of the market, which was finding buyers for the art.
Yeah.
Pivoted to prints at one point and had, one really successful art show, but ultimately it ended with a pitch to Kevin O'Leary, who came on the Western campus. And I'd won a pitch competition and the prize was to pitch to Kevin O'Leary. And I, dressed up in what I felt like was, you could actually Google the picture and find it, wearing like this purple blazer with this puffy blouse. And I thought I looked like, an art connoisseur or whatever, and pitched him the business. And he looked me in the eye and he said, if you pursue this art gallery, you will starve to death. And I was like, oh, okay. And literally the next week, I got an email to apply to the Next Canada, which is the Next 36, to apply to the accelerator program, which was going to give me, the structure to understand how to start a business without, feeling as, nervous as I think I would have been otherwise to start a second business.
After you've been introduced.
Got in and started like the next week. So yeah, it took Kevin O'Leary telling me I was going to starve to death to shut it down, despite probably should have shut it down sooner, but
but it's interesting. I love that again. It's all about execution of ideas. But I love seeing the tidbits of, well, this is an element of there's a lot of successful art marketplaces and now there's this whole world of NFTs that are that's like the second wave of this concept, which is a new form of art, right? And exactly. But it's an interesting point as a sidebar. I'm surprised. Actually, I'm not surprised, but I feel like it would be very useful for an art program to have at least one course on here's how to commercialize your work, so that ideally you don't starve as an artist, especially now with creators. And there's maybe that's I don't know if it's a scalable business, but there's definitely an opportunity to how do I train artists to work in this new economy? Because now anyone can be I guess I can't show you on my camera. I have a piece of art here, a photographer discovered him on Instagram, followed him along, and he transferred him money, and that's how we did our deal. And so there's still a need for what you're doing in some shape or form.
There was something there. And at that point, I truly I thought all businesses you had to bootstrap and self-fund. And as some of these new online art businesses got started, I realized that, they had venture financing and they could actually, really invest in the acquisition channels to grow the business. And it was something that I was working really hard, but not smart, I would say, on that business.
But we learned. We certainly learned. And I mean, I ended up cutting my teeth. I didn't have an experience in starting a business before Next 36. You did, so you're coming in a lot more prepared than I was. And maybe it would be helpful just for there's I think some people from Next probably tuning in. So we should talk a little bit about the program itself and why did you join? What got you excited to join? Because it's a pretty formative part of, I think, both of our lives. I know it was for me, so I assume it was for you as well.
Definitely. So received the email really just at that perfect time when I think I was feeling at an all-time low in terms of start gallery, but having had a taste of entrepreneurship and not wanting to go down, the more standard career path that most business grads do go down, immediately right out of school, I felt like I just wanted to be running a business, but I needed maybe a more structured education on how I would actually approach that. And so that email really just came at the perfect time. And I think the things that were compelling about it were the mentors that were part of the program. Some of them had actually come to speak at Ivy while I was there. So I had some initial exposure to, John Kelleher, for instance, who's one of their initial advisors who is at McKinsey Canada. And I was like, wow, he's a really smart person. If I could get advice from him or spend more time with him, then maybe that would have helped me be successful. The initial funding, that was really total news to me, which sounds crazy because there's so much funding happening now, but 8 years ago it just wasn't as common. So that was really helpful. And then the idea that I was going to meet other people that were interested in starting an idea at Ivy, I definitely felt like the black sheep, and I was the one that was totally a complete oddball for wanting to start my own company. Whereas when I went to the program, I was like, oh, there's all these people that are interested, and got paired up with my business partner now, Lauren, through that program. So a few different elements that just made it really compelling as a next step on the entrepreneurial journey.
and I remember seeing kind of as an alum of the program, I think I was a year right before you, because you're 20 or 2 years. I was 2011, you're 2013, right? And I remember seeing my favorite tradition when we could come in person was watching the demo day every year and seeing like the points in time. And I remember the moment I saw what you guys were working on, I'm like, oh, this is my favorite traits of like an amazing business, where you're taking technology and applying it to a very unsexy or uninnovative industry. Because not to say that what you've built is not incredible, but the bar at this point of like what you can build is huge. The bar is very low, and like some minor innovation has like massive ramifications. So I wanted to get into that story, but before Bridgit, what were the other ideas that you had run through and pitch and worked on before you ended up landing on this?
So very few, which is interesting, although we have gone through a bit of a pivot, but that was more recently. So the way it worked was we applied to Next 36. Lauren and I got matched on a team by, 7 p.m. Saturday night. And the next morning we were going to have to pitch to a room of 200 or 300 investors, people in the tech ecosystem. So immediately we had connected on the fact that Lauren was a civil engineer and both of our families had been in the construction industry. So you're like, we've just met. What do we have in common? Like, let's run through all the things that we could maybe talk about tonight, so we have something to pitch tomorrow. So we connected very quickly on the construction piece. We got on the phone with, anyone we could think of that was in the construction industry. So made about 10 phone calls that night. And the idea we pitched the next morning was a digital logbook. So essentially digitizing the handwritten notes site superintendents take, and it ends up being relevant for liability purposes down the road. And that was the idea. And we thought of the name Bridgit that night. Which
amazing.
Is cool. And then the next day, the feedback was essentially, construction's a huge industry, but we don't think the industry will be willing to adopt technology. So you better move on to something else. And on the Western campus, there was a $400 million construction project going up. And one morning we just said, why don't we just ask the people that are on site instead of just trusting what a room full of Toronto investors are saying? So we got Timbit donuts and coffees and went on site and said, well, we're doing a school project. Could we just learn more about what you're doing? And at first the site was like, clearly these two aren't going to come up with anything, but we go back every single week. Eventually they will let us shadow their meetings. We scaled that research into something we called crane hunting, where we would drive around before class and just look for cranes in the sky and show up on those sites. And really scaled our research. And then over the next 6 months, narrowed in on something called punch list management, which is like issue tracking on these large scale projects. Scaled that business for 6 years, and then recently added a second product 2 years ago, which is actually now really our main, growth part of the business. And that's for workforce planning and construction. So can chat more about that, but that was sort of how it progressed. So very quickly, like that first night, we were pretty narrowed in on, what the concept ended up being for the next 6 years.
I think one of the most interesting takeaways, because this is my own experience in the program, and I see lots of young founders who I talk to kind of fall into this trap of all the people in that room are incredibly smart people in general. And so on one half, especially, at that point when you were in your career and when I went through my career, it's like, well, I should obviously trust them. Like they know a hell of a lot more than me. But I think the nuance here is like, but none of them are who I think is my customer for this idea.
Yeah.
And in my head, I've always kind of summarized it as like the market is actually your mentor. It's the customer of like, do they buy the thing? Do they sign the contract? That's the real feedback that matters. And then the rest of it is, if I'm raising money, if I'm hiring a team, if I'm thinking about strategy, then I think that general pool of smart business people can help a ton. But here it's,
You did. Yeah. It's clear was the right thing to do.
I really agree. And it's interesting because the more you learn about an industry, the more, jaded, or the more you're able to predict where the landmines might be. And therefore you're less willing to pursue an idea. Whereas I think there is something to be said about being somewhat naive at the end of the day and very optimistic about an industry or a market or an opportunity. I know we have one investor and he runs an engineering firm, and he's like, I knew this was a problem. I knew there was probably a way to fix it, but I just, dealt with people that were resistant in the industry or this or that for so many years that I just figured it would never work. So it was like that level of experience, like maybe he identified the problem still, but he maybe wouldn't have acted on it because he was so close to all the barriers that, we hit, but we're like, we're going to get through it. We're going to push forward. So sometimes like being, knowing less is actually an asset in some ways.
Yeah. 100%. The naivete gives you kind of a shield of just like, oh, I didn't realize this was a dumb idea anyway. So
trying.
And one thing I wanted to understand more is, when you went on your crane hunting expeditions, do you remember what was when you walk onto the site, what was the pitch? Like, what was the perfected pitch that, gave you access to whatever you needed in terms of time and help and whatnot?
So it evolved. So I think initially it was just appealing to like human emotion. Just, we're students. Can we have 10 minutes of your time? Look at the sketches we've made. Look at the design. And people are like, yeah, sure. 10 minutes. Like I'll talk to these two people. And then when we went back and we were further ahead every single time, I think those research contacts were like, holy crap, like these two actually might do this. And then they started getting more serious and spending more and more time with us. As the business evolved, one of our first go-to-market strategies was actually go-to-market strategies. Once I tell you what it is, was we would fly to New York for the day. We didn't have enough money in the business to afford a hotel room for the night. So we'd fly for the day. We'd have a site, a list of 40 construction sites we were going to go to. And in New York, there's very little space. So the site office is always on the 4th floor of a building. So we just walk in our construction gear, go up the hoist, find the site office on the 4th floor. And that's when we were actually pitching the product. And we would immediately just try and ask as quickly as possible, like, hey, we're just wondering what you use for punch list management on this project. And they'd be like, Excel or paper or this or that. And we're like, okay, like, do you have 5 minutes? We just would love to show you the app. And then we would just pull up our phone and they'd be like, oh, that's pretty cool. And in the end, we closed like probably millions of dollars of revenue off those site visits. And they were grueling and you would leave with blisters all over your feet. I remember having to buy a new pair of steel toe boots partway through the trip because mine were just like ripping up my feet after for so many sites. I think our record was like 45 sites in a day. And that was how we acquired customers for like the first 2 years, was just by going site to site to site and just walking to site offices and showing the app for 5 minutes.
It's not even cold calling. That's the old school
boots on the ground approach.
Yeah, traveling sales, true field sales.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to pull this up here. Was this what you were showing people? At what point in the journey are you showing people this as like the mock-ups?
Yeah, so this was during the initial research that we were doing. And so for those that aren't as familiar with the Next 36 program, the funding that we got, so it was a max of 90 grand and it was milestone based. And we actually didn't have a software developer on our team or a technical co-founder, but we were desperate to get that full amount of capital. So we had to invent ways that seemed like we were making progress, even though we couldn't actually build the product for majority of the length of the program. So by having these wireframes and getting, official letters of intent signed by these prospects, that was enough to show the program that we were in fact progressing, and we were able to get the rest of our funding. So yeah, this is the letter of intent. So we got 10 different prospects to sign this letter, and it's non-binding, but it's just like, if we actually build this product, will you pay for it? Yes or no? And it was very interesting to see how many people were like, oh, actually, I'm not really responsible. Like, I don't think I could fall off on that. And so you can call the BS, pretty quickly, which is good. And then you also realize who's serious. And we use this as leverage to raise the first $250,000 of capital to have the money to pay a development team to get the first version of the product built.
Wow. And so because you've kind of hinted another thing here, this is basically your early like qualification system of like, am I talking actually to the decision maker?
Yeah.
One point, I'm jumping around a little bit because there's so many interesting things. When you walk into the site and you kind of have this pitch, I imagine some people tell you like, get the hell out of my office. Like, how the hell did you get in here? Well, were there any funny objections, or like, was there I'm sure there's many, but was there a particular pitch that you remember where you just got like booted out of there?
We did notice actually over the years that the security really started to get a lot more intense in New York. So there was much more formal processes. So we knew that in the bigger markets, it was going to become more and more difficult.
Yeah.
So then we would typically figure out that there was a coffee shop or some sort of lunch place that a lot of the site team members would go to get coffee or get lunch. And so we'd hover around those areas if the security was too tight on the projects. We definitely got yelled at. One of the first sites we went to in London, Lauren went in because I didn't have steel toe boots at that point, and she got yelled at, like totally screamed at. And we just didn't go back to that site, but it's one of those things that we were like, okay, like brush off, keep going. 9 out of every 10 people have been really nice and receptive. So just too bad. And I'm pretty sure that company ended up buying the product down the road. Not that individual specifically, but someone else actually did buy the software.
when you make good stuff, eventually they'll come around. But I think that's so funny. It's so amazing. If you just really roll up to the site, take the hoist up to the office, and you got a 5-minute window to. So you touched on another point on funding. So Next gave, I guess, the first 90,000 for the business, but for I would say the true external money, because at that point Next is funding you, like once you're in the program, not the full 90, but they're like, we're betting on you, Mallorie. We're betting on the shell of whatever you're going to create, and that's what they were investing in. You actually now have an idea and some validation. How did you put together that round? What was that process like?
Yeah, so through the program, we ended up meeting a number of people like yourself that were in the program a couple of years prior to us that were generous enough to open up their network. Maybe they had raised capital from some different angel investors. So we were able to get, a few connections, just building our network through that program. And the very first angel we met with was Dan DeBow, who's, well-known angel investor and entrepreneur in the Toronto tech ecosystem. And we met with him at his office, and we told him about all the customer research we did, and we showed him those wireframes that you pulled up a moment ago. And he immediately was just really enthused because of all the customer research we did and how hard we worked to understand the industry that we were going to be selling into. And he committed $10,000 as an angel investment. Amazing. And we walked out of that office and we're like, what? Someone's going to give us money? And then Dan introduced us to a couple more people. And then he has a really great reputation, of course. And so that it just sort of snowballed from there. And we were able to get the first round done. So he was the very first person beyond the Next program that we got investment from.
That's amazing. So that helps you ship the product. And it's the V1 of the, what was the product called at the time? It was just Bridgit?
It was just Bridgit. Yeah. Then we got a cease and desist from a company. So we had to change the product name a few years later. I remember we were operating out of our basement office in Kitchener, which was, I think, still my apartment at the time. And we got this package from this big public company. And it was in one of those, yellow envelopes. And it was every page of our website printed out with every time we use the word Bridgit, it was like highlighter, and there's a letter from a lawyer. And we're like, we're just in a basement. Like, we don't know what to do with this. We don't know what this is. And I remember just,
oh my God.
Anyways, I'm like, they probably thought they were sending it to some big corporate, I don't know who they, so it's just very funny to see the 6 of us at that point in time opening up this very formal letter. So we ended up having a product name, and the company has always remained Bridgit, and we were able to maintain the company name.
That's good. You negotiated well to keep that. They could have just emailed you.
Trademark, and it's all good.
And so you start scaling the business, and I think, what's the total now of money raised? We've raised
$20 million in capital, and our team is about 75 people now.
All out of Kitchener-Waterloo.
Lots in Toronto, actually. So we really opened up the recruitment pool throughout the last year, and a couple out in BC. Right. And it's something that we're recruiting much more broadly now that everyone's adjusted to working successfully remotely. So still HQ will be in KW, but lots of team members from other areas now.
and so the business is obviously scaled, and you were able to ship a first version of the product, but between it's an 8-year journey. Along the path, were there any moments that you was like, what, this, if we screw this up, or if this crisis is not fixed, you're like, wow, the company's over and done with? Is there any kind of scary life or death moments that you remember?
Yeah, there's definitely been a few. I would say there was one early on where it was before we had a very large development team. We didn't have a QA testing team at that point. And there was a release that went out that required us to do a rollback, but there was no rollback plan in place. So it was very bad. And I was in California, and I remember talking to Lauren on the phone, and we're trying to figure this all out. And, we made it through, and the team that we still have a lot of team members that were around during those early days. So everyone definitely wears it as a badge of honor that we made it through, but it was incredibly stressful. And had the development team not been able to get a fix out, very quickly, it would have been even more catastrophic, or had we been a bigger company at that point in time, but we were still pretty small. So that was definitely very scary, and just was, I wish it had never happened, but at the same time, I'm happy it happened at the size that it did, because then we invested so much more heavily in our testing practices and QA, and have always made sure that that's a very critical part of our process. And now, our product and development team and our testing team are incredibly strong. And I think it took going through, and I think every software company has one of those scares early on, but it took going through that situation to be we can never underestimate the importance of that again. Yeah. So that was kind of scary. And then we went through an actual pivot. So there was no scare there in any way, but just really more of a realization that we were selling in an industry that's very project-based. Our revenue model was project-based. And we felt that if we were able to build a product that had more of a recurring revenue model, then we'd really be able to achieve much faster growth and build a much larger company, and ultimately serve more needs of our customers if we added a second product to our portfolio. So that happened 2 years ago now, and was a pretty big shift that I'm happy to share more about. But again, not one of those moments that we were afraid of failure, but it was still a very big decision for the company to launch that second product.
And I think to your point that you mentioned at the beginning of, as you've kind of gotten older and more experienced, you're trying to be I have to be very focused. I want to kind of only, spend time on the right things. And even though it's within the industry, it's a different product. It's a different, it seems like a different persona you're selling to within the organization. And I guess similar question to what I'd asked on different ideas. Before you chose this as the kind of the pivot or evolution, was there another, what were the kind of 2-3 other options you were thinking of at the time as alternatives before you went with the workforce management evolution?
So it wasn't we had specific criteria, but once we identified the gap around workforce planning in the construction industry, and how, very large companies were using Excel and whiteboards to manage their 500 or 1,000 person workforces. We just said, this fits the criteria that we were looking for. Let's build an MVP. And we went through the exact same process we had done with the first product, where we got letters of interest signed, leverage that to raise capital, and then we're actually able to build the product. So we really repeated the process, which I think has actually given us so much comfort in that continuous innovation. And now we have more funding, we can be a lot more aggressive. So we're we need to move way faster on broadening the product portfolio and not wait 6 years or not, wait to hit a growth wall or anything like that. Like now I think we just have a much more ambitious view of how we can continue to evolve the product portfolio and not just have a single product. But yeah, that's kind of, so it's just the one product we are always focused on building once it checked all the boxes for the criteria.
And for the team, like I love that it's, kind of use what worked before and doing it again with letters of intent, raise capital to build it. But for you as an operator, and then for kind of guiding your team, how did you actually set the org up to execute on that? Because at the point of before that's launched, 100% of your revenue comes from not this product. And so you could argue any time spent away from this is a loss of focus. And because we struggled this with that exact, like we've had, this discussion many times, which is why I'm curious about how you approached it.
Yeah. And pivots are hard because so the first product was still growing and we had, a substantial amount of revenue. So it wasn't like, oh, we only were able to close 5K of MRR and then we couldn't close more than that. So we decided to like try a new idea. Like we had very good customers. It was growing. We just knew that the business model was not going to be sustainable long-term. So it wasn't very clear that this was definitely the right approach. So there was a leap of faith that was required there. But again, looking at what our goals were, building a really large company, growing quickly, we felt that we had to do something. So what we decided to do was that quarter by quarter, we would move more and more team members over based on the traction the second product was getting, because we didn't want to just shift the full company over to the resource planning product if we didn't end up getting traction. So we started with one sales rep and, the product team dedicating a quarter essentially to the development. And the first product was so stable that we could afford to not, continue building features for a quarter. It wasn't a huge deal. So moved dev resources and then the business team just gradually quarter by quarter. And in that time, what we were able to do is really build our KPIs for the first product around profitability and then focus the KPIs of the second product around growth. So our team really was engaged in hitting those goals. And there wasn't really this feeling of like, I'm on the new product, I'm on the old product, like one's better than the other, because they both were going to be incredibly critical to us surviving and eventually thriving as an organization. So I think just making sure that everyone on the team had something to rally around, something they were excited about, something that they felt equipped to be successful in, and then being careful that we didn't overinvest in the new product. And if it didn't work, we weren't able to go back. Because that was one thing that we were nervous of. Like if we overinvest in the second product, it doesn't work, but then we've completely like given up on the first product, then what? Then we're left with nothing, right? So it was very gradual and took probably about a year before most of the team had moved over to Bench, and we still are operating the first product, and we have a smaller number of team members that are maintaining it and continuing to support our customers on that. But we don't expect it to be like the major growth area for our business in the future.
Got it. And from and I guess it would be different kind of before and after Bench. But I'm curious, how did your go-to-market model evolve from rolling up to construction sites when I would say, maybe at the point of when I would say you first professionalized it or had other people other than the founder selling the product? What did that version like, and then how has that evolved since with Bench versus what you had before with the older product?
Yeah, it was a sad day when I realized we couldn't just show up on construction sites to do the sales anymore. So we did before the pandemic, we were doing a lot of in-person sales. So, flying to different cities, meeting with construction companies, and specifically trade shows were a really successful way for us to build the business. The industry really gathers around trade shows. And then once we moved into sort of the last year, we've just moved to complete inside sales, which everyone, the industry and our team have moved pretty seamlessly into that new rhythm. And I think we'll mostly rely on inside sales in the future as opposed to going to meet prospective customers in person. And then the in-person visits we'll save for more like our existing clients and then the trade shows as well. So I think for most companies, at least in the construction tech space, I don't believe that they'll really go back to in-person meetings for software sales very, very quickly at all.
Well, yeah, I think your product is luckily something that's quite demoable and quite easy to kind of show virtually. And so from kind of training the team, doing inside sales, whether it's inbound or outbound, it's a different sales or different skill set than trade shows. Like, I know my background is I could operate in a trade show, and my products actually never did very well in trade shows. So maybe it's a combination of like not an industry fit, but I knew like my skill set was always like outbound email was my number one personal skill as a salesperson. And so for your team, how did you help them transition to this new approach?
Yeah, so we saw less, they were always doing like a lot of email outreach and everything before. So that was less of a learning curve. I would say the biggest challenge that we've had, and it's something that one of our newer team members actually pointed out to me recently. And I was like, you are totally right. This is I just kind of lost track of it with everything else that's going on. But basically we had a lot of success hiring individuals that weren't in the they weren't from the construction industry, and we would teach them about the industry. And with the field products, since our team was spending so much time on site, either from sales or customer success, they would just absorb new information about the industry by being in the site offices, going to the companies, getting tours of the construction projects, speaking to the subcontractors, speaking to everyone on the team. And as soon as we moved to the bench product, we lost that. So our team members weren't going on site, maybe going to the actual headquarter office, but you're not getting a tour of the site. You're not meeting, 15 different people. You're meeting one person. And so the biggest change that we're working on now is how do we actually train our team to know as much about the industry as they did when they were going to visit site, and just really trying to, document that successfully, have really strong onboarding process around that. Because it is so critical, of course, for our team to know the inside, like the construction industry inside and out, but it's just something we have to be a lot more deliberate about now. Whereas with the first product, we didn't really have to think about it that much. It just happened organically.
Yeah. And I definitely empathize with that, because there's all these little, whether it's acronyms or whatever words or things that you'll use that will make you more native to the environment. You'll only learn it by being immersed in it.
Yeah.
So
like when team members join even like tech companies, and you're like hearing MRR, AR, LTV to CAC, like anytime we have a team meeting with new team members, we have like a separate Slack group going with, this is what this word means. This is what this word means.
The little dictionary
stuff. Yeah.
Oh my God.
But yeah, it's the same for any industry, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we've built here too at Clearco. We have something called Founder School that we use as our onboarding to kind of tell people like, hey, what is it actually like to be a founder? Because that's who we, built our product in service of, and what are all the terms around capital and investment and, cost of capital and so on. Yeah. And I because I think I'm a very curious person, I think it would be really fun to see, like, to jump into like an onboarding for something like Bridgit, of like, teach me about the construction industry. Like, I just want to know everything about it.
Yeah, that's what we're working on right now. So
very fun. And so as we're coming up in time, I'm curious about what's next for you, and let's start with Bridgit, and then we can start what you're personally excited about in life as we hopefully open up to explore the world again. Bench sounds like the growth engine for the company. What does success look like for you? Call it, if we were talking May 12th, 2022, what would you be proud of seeing with the business by then?
Yeah, so right now we have some pretty ambitious growth goals. So we would be at minimum double the size that we are now, maybe even triple if we get closer to hitting some of those more aggressive stretch targets. And that's really by continuing to service the general contractors in the North American industry, but just really broadening the scope of the product that we have today, and solving, more challenges that they're having really around, people management and people operations in the construction industry. Overall, the construction industry has been so project focused and people in a lot of ways, and the professional development around people and thoughtful workforce planning has been overlooked in some regards, because it was such a manual effort to just get the bare minimum done. But now when it's digitized, there's so much more you can do in terms of like the insights you're driving and everything. So we're really excited about continuing to dig into this opportunity and just, expand the solution for our customers. So hopefully we'll be a bigger team running even more efficiently with, everyone being totally up to speed on all the details of the construction industry and in person. That would be nice. That would be
that's the dream. Just everyone's firing on all cylinders. And how about for you, putting company aside, though I mentioned companies always all consuming. Let's assume we open up in the next month or two. I don't know what Ontario's situation will be, but we can be optimistic on that front. What would you be most excited to do once you can travel again, once you can kind of do the things you used to do, whether it's learning something or whatnot?
Yeah, it's definitely funny. You've probably experienced this, but when you're, a huge percentage of your identity becomes your company. So whenever, people are asking me about just personally, what are you thinking? I'm like, what's Bridgit thinking? Is that what you mean?
My name is Bridgit, actually. I'm sorry.
Definitely travel. Like I miss traveling for work, to see our customers, but I also miss the fact that I haven't had a real vacation, and our team hasn't been able to really have a real vacation. Like it's just so hard to disconnect when there's nowhere to go and really nothing else to do. So really excited to just go on a trip where, I can try lots of new food and explore a new city. And I think that's a common theme of what everyone's really excited to be able to do. So yeah, that's the main thing that I have to look forward to. Some nice travel.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. And pretty much I feel like I'm limited to I can go to Prince Edward County, have wine there. I can go to Niagara and I can have wine there. I can go to the bottle shop and create a little experience. That's really about it, unless you and you can't really do other places because they're kind of quasi still, at least in Canada, still quasi closed down. So
I want to meet all the people that I've met online this year.
Yeah.
I just assumed that my network would just stop growing and I wouldn't really meet anyone new the past year, but I met so many people. And so I just want to do a tour of the US and meet everyone in person. You can find out how tall people are, because right now we have how tall people are.
We should do that. So we have this internally at the company. Someone's created a Google slide and asked everyone to put their heads on one of those boards to be how tall are you?
Yeah, it's so crazy. So anyways, that'll be interesting.
That'll be fun. Well, we have one comment to close us off from our friend Bobby. You're a rock star, Mallorie. So
beside each other at Ivy, actually, he was my one entrepreneurial buddy in my class who has started some businesses himself. So
amazing. Well, it's as we learned at the very beginning, it's a very, very small world. And so, Bobby, thank you for tuning in, and Mallorie, thank you for taking the time to chat and reminisce and share some thoughts and insights with our little community here. I really do appreciate it.
For sure. Thanks for having me, and good luck with everything that Clearco has planned. You're all definitely an inspiration to us at Bridgit. So we're trying to grow and follow in your footsteps. So thanks.
You're on a pretty good track, I have no doubt. But thank you again. Have an amazing day. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll catch you next week. See you later.